Hi, if you want to know how to help people master their emotional states, then understanding the links between the hypothalamus, the triune brain, and the somatic coach training is absolutely necessary. Hi, my name is Brian Traskos. I'm the Director of Education here at the Somatic Coaching Academy. And in this video, we're going to break down an understanding of neurobiology in a way that many alternative medicine and holistic professionals can benefit from knowing about. Okay, so let's start with the triune brain. So triune means three parts. Now, to help describe the triune brain, I'm going to bring my friend Scully in here. So here's Scully. He's going to help us out. Now, if we open up Scully and we look in here, then right through there, the lowest part of the triune brain, the brain stem, comes up through the foramen magnum up into the brain complex itself up here. So the brainstem is what we call the reptilian brain. And like all reptiles have a capacity to find food, to run away, to fight, to reproduce, to breathe, to all these basic functions of life, if you will. And I like to kind of quip a little bit and say every baby is born as a little reptile. Every baby, if they're born healthy, can suckle, can sweat, can cry, can poop, can pee, can do all those basic life function things, breathe, and that sort of stuff. So that's the lowest part of the triune brain model is what we call the reptilian brain or the brain stem. Now the next part is what we call the mammalian brain. So mammals have a limbic system. Now, reptiles don't have that system functioning as well. So limbic system sits down here in the deeper part of the brain structures. And a couple of structures we're going to talk about today too are the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland sits right down in this little well. It's really well protected in there. Lets us know how incredibly important it is. And the hypothalamus sits just above it, actually. Well, when we look at the model in Scully here. So that next part of the brain or the limbic system is our mammalian brain. So mammals have emotions, and we learn through emotional and social context, which is where that limbic brain is developed. The limbic brain primarily develops between the ages of 0 and 7. That's where we learn a lot of our cultural, social rules around emotions, the way we relate to things, context, structure, those sorts of things. So by the time a child is 7 years old, if they have developed normal development, then they have a fully developed reptilian brain or the brain stem. And they also have a fully developed mammalian or limbic brain. Now, we call the combination of the limbic brain and the brainstem our emotional brain. Now, after the age of 7, the conscious brain, or what we call the neocortex, starts to develop. And in our skull, the neocortex will raise up above the midline of the skull and be up in this area. So, typically, if we're to put Scully back together here, you can imagine that the brain would fill the rest of the brain case up there. Okay, I'll put Scully aside for a second. Now, the neocortex is really where our executive function happens, where we think, where we plan, where we imagine, where we can plan for the future, where we can actually even change our current behavior to create a different result in the future. All these things happen in the neocortex. It's also the part of our brain where we think rationally from, where we use mirror neurons, where we can have better social context and social cueing. The executive function also has some control over our lower brain centers, over impulses to do certain things that we might think about. Oh, that might not be the best thing to do right now. I think I will curb that impulse and do something differently. So our executive function has some control there as well. Now, a lot of experts say that the triune brain model is a little too simplistic. And while I agree that there's much more complexity here, I think it does allow us to start to get an understanding, a basic understanding of how the brain functions and how we can use it in somatic coach training work. Okay. So if we go back down to the limbic brain for a second, and I showed you really quick on Scully this, at the heart of the limbic brain is the hypothalamus. And as the name indicates, the hypothalamus sits right underneath the thalamus, which Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps Score, calls the cook of the brain, because all of the sensory information that enters into the brain lands first on the thalamus, where it's all mixed together into a recipe sort of thing. So all the sensory information from everywhere comes into the brain, connects in the thalamus mixes it up, and we have a sensory experience that we are now creating our reality from actually. Now, the hypothalamus sits right underneath the thalamus, so it gets pretty immediate access to this recipe. And depending on how the information is interpreted by other parts of the limbic system, especially the amygdala, this will alter our arousal level by either revving up the nervous system or calming down the nervous system. Now the hypothalamus is a key structure in connecting our neurobiology between the brain and the endocrine system via the pituitary gland, and has important pathways controlling things like body temperature, hunger, thirst, fatigue, sleep, and even attachment behaviors. So the hypothalamus really has this key functionality digging into our hormonal systems, how it drives ourselves hormonally, which of course changes and alters the way we perceive the world and the actions that we will take. Now, if the amygdala judges the stimulus that was cooked up in the thalamus as a threat, then the hypothalamus gets the message to activate what we call the HPA axis, otherwise known as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal pathways. Now, when this happens, an immediate process linking threat perception and body response has occurred. And the hypothalamus activates the pituitary gland, which in turn activates the adrenal glands to release adrenaline and cortisol, kicking off what's commonly known as the fight or flight response. So this happens immediately, so fast. Hypothalamus is like the carburetor of our nervous system. It revs up the activity, activates the pituitary gland. Immediately, information travels down to our adrenal glands, adrenaline, cortisol, and off we go. So when this is happening, adrenaline, cortisol is happening in the body. And so we have the brain immediately connecting brain function with body or somatic function. So soma means body in ancient Greek. And so the word somatic has been adopted to mean relating to the body. And over time, the word somatic has evolved in holistic practices to include the idea that the body has an inherent wisdom to it that can influence the quality of our lives in a very deep way. And now as a side note, my prediction and why the work we do here at the Somatic Coach Academy is so important is that in the next few years, life coaching professionals without an understanding of somatic practice and bioenergetics will be at a distinct disadvantage in marketing the work that they can provide to their clients and the impact that they make for the clients. You look right now, things like body mind knowledge is just exploding. Trauma-informed practices are exploding in awareness and importance right now. And to really serve our clients well, we need to have that information right at hand. Okay, back to the somatic response. Now, the body's been revved up, right? And we're in this fighting, flighting. Our muscles are getting tight. Our breathing's getting shallow. Our blood pressure's going up. Our heart is racing. And here's the other thing that happens is our executive function goes offline. So as humans, we have this neocortex that we put so much investment into. Hey, I can think, I can rationalize, I can plan, I have purpose, and I know my meaning. All those things are unique to humans. But it goes offline when we're in fight or flight responses. The amygdala hijacks our sensory information coming in and basically cuts out the upper parts of our brain. So all of our brain activity is happening down in these lower brain centers down here in Scully, and they're not even getting up higher into these higher centers. And if the HPA axis response, that hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, becomes chronic, if it just keeps firing, then our hippocampus, which is the timekeeper of our brain, has to do with our memory sequencing, and the neocortex cells actually begin to atrophy, they begin to die, and making it even more difficult to function intellectually and rationally. Now, this is where a lot of life coaching professionals get stuck in trying to help their clients think more effectively or motivationally. The problem really is that If the neocortex is offline, then there isn't a lot of thinking happening anyway. And this is where somatic coach training comes in to teach people trauma-informed care strategies that work from the what we call the bottom up rather than the top down. If the top down isn't working, we've got to enter into someone's experience to help them from the ground floor moving upward. Now, some of these strategies are things like self-massage and diaphragmatic breathing, but are most effective, even more effective when we go deeper into someone's system, helping someone not only to self-regulate their arousal level, but also re-perceive their reality from a somatic level. We have to remember that just about everything we know about the world comes in the form of sensory information. And when we can learn to modify the sensory information, that most profoundly influences the brain, then we are no longer prisoners to our own limbic system and our own HPA axis responses. So the big takeaway here is that when the HPA axis, when the hypothalamus is firing and the triune brain gets hijacked, the higher parts of our brain get hijacked from the stress response that's going on through our limbic system, working with a person intellectually is really not the best way to do it. And it can create a huge sense of failure in people because they're just not operating well from a thought process. It can lead to guilt and shame patterns. It can actually even sometimes cause re-traumatization for folks. So we really have to learn how to go from this bottom up practices, learning to work through the body to help people have a better effect in their life function. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. For more continued education like this, please like, share, and subscribe right here with us on YouTube at the Somatic Coaching Academy.